How They Croaked by Georgia Bragg. James Garfield. So, who the heck was President James Garfield? He's barely mentioned in history books, and we don't celebrate his birthday, and there's no money with his face on it. The few schools named Garfield are not named after the famous cartoon cat, but this guy. Garfield was the 20th president of the United States for only 4 months before some nut job shot him. And it was easy, too, because Garfield had no bodyguards. Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated 16 years before, and still nobody thought that the president needed protection. Today, a president can't go anywhere without Secret Service protection, but not back then. Garfield was a sitting duck for anyone with a chip on his shoulder and a screw loose. In 1881, outlaws like Jesse James and Billy the Kid were holding up trains and shooting people. Local law was enforced with gunfights in the center of town, and a boy of 15 could join a posse to hunt down a suspected criminal. Almost a quarter of all U.S. currency was counterfeit. The Secret Service had been created by the Treasury to protect money, but not people. Policemen protected the White House and its grounds, but not the president. Anybody could walk into the White House, and if the president wasn't there, no problem. You could find out when he would be back. His schedule was printed in the daily newspapers. On July 2nd, 1881, President Garfield and his Secretary of State, James D. Blaine, went to the train station. Charles J. Gutaw, a crazy guy with a gun who apparently read the daily newspapers, was waiting there. Because no one protected the president, Gutaw was able to walk right behind Garfield and shoot him twice with his snub-nosed .44 caliber British Bulldog revolver. One bullet nicked Garfield's arm and the other hit him in the back. Garfield went down. Dialing 911 in an emergency was about 90 years down the road, and considering that there was only a couple of phones in Washington at the time, one at the White House and one at the Treasury, calling for help meant Mr. Blaine screaming at the top of his lungs. Garfield was bleeding all over the place, but he was still alive. A mattress was dragged over for him to lie on, and a woman cradled his head in her lap. A doctor arrived and gave Garfield a shot of brandy to lessen the pain when he examined the bullet hole by sticking his finger in it. Without x-rays, which weren't discovered for another 14 years, sticking a finger in the bullet hole was the only way to find a bullet, and Garfield's doctor didn't wash his hands or wear gloves. Pretty soon, 10 doctors were at the station taking turns poking their unwashed fingers into the hole in Garfield's back. The bullet was inside Garfield's body, but not one of them could find it. Bullet probes were jammed into the bullet hole to try to dig out the slug. After several tries and plenty of wrong turns, the doctor had missed the bullet path completely and reamed a whole new 12-inch long path in Garfield's back. They still couldn't find the bullet, but by then millions of microscopic germs had been deposited inside of Garfield's body. Since there were no trauma centers at hospitals back then, Garfield was taken in a horse-drawn ambulance to the White House. He was given a glass of champagne and a shot of morphine for the pain. He wasn't expected to live through the night. Garfield's legs went numb. He vomited every 30 minutes, and the bed got soaked with blood. But he was still alive the next morning. And that was day one in what became an 80-day hunt for the lead bullet in Garfield's back. The White House was swamped with letters about how to find the bullet. People suggested hanging him by his feet so the bullet could fall out, or sucking it out with a pump. Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, made a contraption that would send a noise through the telephone receiver when it passed over the metal bullet. But Bell didn't realize that Garfield was lying on top of another recent invention, a metal coil spring mattress. So over and over again, Bell's device gave a false reading. A screen was set up around Garfield's bed. For unknown reasons, instead of experienced medical nurses, the wives of the cabinet members rotated on a 24-hour schedule, attending to Garfield's needs. His doctors restricted visitors, including the vice president and Garfield's own family. It wasn't long before the bullet hole got infected. Doctors thought pus was a sign of healing, not infection. Garfield's doctor cut into his wound to make the opening larger so that twice a day they could stick in a rubber hose and drain out the pus. Besides pus, they dug out fabric from his shirt and pieces of his rib. Weeks went by and there was still no bullet, and Garfield was wasting away. He had high fevers, he threw up everything he ate, and he was delirious. 44 days into Garfield's ordeal, his doctors decided to not give him any more food to eat. They only gave him food rectally. The enemas were made of eggs, beef extract, and whiskey. The doctors were starving him to death. Garfield's whole body became infected. His position was adjusted 100 times a day so he wouldn't lean on one spot too long. An infected parotid gland by his right ear made his eye and cheek so swollen that the whole side of his face was paralyzed. Garfield asked to be taken to the New Jersey shore. In order to make the trip as easy as possible for him, 3,200 feet of train tracks were added to the train, could travel right up to the door of the beach house. On the journey there, Garfield's train unexpectedly stopped a few hundred yards shy of the house. People nearby gathered behind the train car and pushed it the rest of the way to his front door. 2 weeks later, on September 19, 1881, less than 3 months after Garfield was shot, he died. Unfortunately, the infected wound, blood poisoning, and a heart attack did him in. He had lost 100 pounds in 3 months. The autopsy showed that the bullet was nowhere near where the doctors thought it was. The bullet never touched any vital organs. Garfield would have lived if the doctors had kept their dirty hands off of him. 20 years later, in 1901, President McKinley was assassinated. There was still no Secret Service to protect the president. Many years after the assassinations of Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, Congress legalized the use of federal funds for the protection of the person of the President of the United States. In 1907, 2 agents were officially assigned full-time to protect President Theodore Roosevelt. Today, there are approximately 3,200 special agents assigned to protect the president, vice president, and their families, former presidents, and visiting heads of foreign states, among several others.